Afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our final session on the Manifesto before Meurig wraps up as President and we move on to the AGM. But before we move on to the session, just wanted to say how pleased I was to see so many young faces at the conference. I think we're always aware that we must always keep our younger farmers in the loop when it comes to these events, and we are proactive. We make sure that the young farmers bring someone from every county, and our regions make sure they have a couple of young farmers. And I'm very pleased to say that Lindsay Martin from Kent YFC, Lindsay, you're Agri Chairman of YFC. You wanted to say a few words.
I'd just like to thank the NFU on behalf of the National Federation of Young Farmers for their continued support with places here at the conference. It's nice to see a lot of young farmers are taking up this opportunity, and I, for my first time, have really enjoyed it, so thank you.
Lindsay, that's very kind. It was great to see you and your fellow young farmers here, and we look forward to seeing you again in the future, maybe in a different role, but who knows. Okay, I think we realise that we've got an interesting few months ahead of us at the NFU. It is going to be very busy. We have the usual issues we cover. We have the challenge of some very low farm gate prices in some sectors. We have the launch of 3 tiers of new ag environment. We have 3 new rural development programs being announced almost as we speak. We have the challenge of getting as many of our members getting BPS applications in good order and in good time before May. And to put the cherry on the cake, we have a general election in early May. And as we know, it's going to be one of the hardest fought, too close to call elections that we've probably seen for a generation. And it could well colour agricultural policy in this country for the next 5 years, if not beyond. So, as ever, we are an apolitical organisation, but we encourage our members to be involved with the issues, to interrogate those who want our votes as to what they're going to do from agriculture. This is our opportunity, and we need to make the most of it. And we're always keen to guide and steer you whenever we can. And so, very pleased that we've got Martin Haworth, our Deputy Director General, and Matt Ware, Head of Government and Parliamentary Affairs, to take you through what we've got lined up in that respect. Martin, Matt, it's all yours.
Right, good afternoon ladies and gentlemen. It's very good to see so many people who have made it through from lunch, and we're just going to do a short presentation about the NFU Manifesto and a few of the lobbying tactics to do with the general election, and then after that hopefully have an interactive conversation and question and answer session. So to start off with, I hope you've all seen the manifesto. We've got copies on the membership stand out front. It's also available on the NFU online to download. And we've also got, just to try and make things a little bit more interactive, we've got pledge cards as well by commodities. And again, those are available on the NFU membership stand and online. But the most exciting thing that we've done, the biggest innovation this year for us, is if you have a look on your delegate badges, I want everyone to check their badges and look on the flip side. I'm sure you've all noticed this and studied it at length, but we've got the top 10 NFU general election pledges. And we're going to be testing you on this, and the security guards on the escalators on the way in aren't actually there to stop animal rights protesters. They're to check that you know the top 10 before you're allowed to leave this afternoon. But seriously, when you go away, please take this away with you. It's designed to be fitted into your pocket. If you're meeting with MPs, having a hustings or whatever, then you've got the top 10 handy to check through them. And the great thing is that if you have a very good hustings, and maybe the hustings involves a few drinks afterwards with the rest of the branch or whatever, and you get a little bit carried away, it's also got your name and address on the front, so you can be returned home safely. Right, so I think it's useful to look back at 2010, and 2010 was a very interesting general election for us. We had 46 policy asks back in 2010, and the parties matched us pretty well on 50% of our asks, as you can see here. And we had a very good campaign. The members really got out and lobbied well, and we're trying to build upon that in this general election. You can see in the top picture the Prime Minister was met by his Witney branch in Oxfordshire, and we got a photo of him with the manifesto. So what's happened since 2010? Well, quite a lot, really. We've had 10 of our asks have been met by the coalition, which isn't bad, really, in 4.5 years. And I'd say that 13 of those asks have been partially met, so almost met. And if you add those two together, it's 23, and we asked for 46 things. So we've got a 50% hit rate pretty much. However, things always do go against you, and we have lost out on about 7 areas, most notably things like SAWS and CAP. But pretty good. It's been a pretty good hit rate overall. We're a little bit more concerned this time round because there's likely to be a coalition. The parties are they're more reluctant to put lots of detailed policies into their manifestos, so they're being a little bit more edgy this time round. So, by way of overview of the manifesto, I just want to reiterate that it's part of the wider NFU campaigning, so it's part of the Back British Farming campaign and our growth strategy and growth plan. It's supposed to be short, punchy, and cost neutral, and it is cost neutral or cost saving in all areas except for where it asks for an infrastructure allowance, and that is because we've lost our capital allowances since 2010 as the Chancellor moved to reduce corporation tax. The problem we have in agriculture is that most of you in the audience will be partnerships or sole traders, so you don't benefit from the reduced corporation tax, but you've lost your capital allowances. So one of the main asks we have in the manifesto is to reinstate some form of capital allowance in the form of an infrastructure allowance. And the final thing really to say about the manifesto itself, this glossy document, is this is a political document. This document has been used with politicians, MPs and special advisors. We don't expect you to read this and take it home yourself fully. It's more useful really for yourself to maybe use the pledge cards and the top 10 in a more user-friendly way. So there's 5 main themes in the main manifesto. Rather than talk about every single commodity at length and just list everything like we used to, we've put it under 5 strategies in 5 areas. So we've got growth, securing knowledge and technology, protecting animal and plant health, building fair and secure food chains, and caring for the countryside. And obviously some of the themes are cross-cutting and are in several different areas, but we found it a more manageable way to deal with the themes. And what we'd encourage people to do at hustings is to ask questions in those clusters of themes, so that we have an orderly hustings meeting rather than questions coming from all over the place. And as we saw this morning with John Humphreys, it's quite useful to bunch the questions together. So rollout and reception. The manifesto was actually written last summer, so it was ready in time for the party conferences. It was rolled out at all 3 party conferences at our fringe meetings, and then some branches, some groups, some regions have already met with MPs in the intervening time, but really what we're asking for now is a concerted effort, a concerted push in the final couple of months, the final 70 plus days, to really get the message out to MPs and prospective candidates. And it's something that we all need to do. There are 3 staff in the Westminster office that deal with MPs, and you may obviously know that there's 650 MPs, so 3 staff, we're not really going to be able to get around them very easily. That's sort of 200 odd each to deal with. But if all the members go out and get involved, we can really make a real difference and a real change. I'm just going to hand over to Martin, who's going to do the next few slides.
Yeah, good afternoon everyone, and thank you very much, Matt, for your introduction there. I'll move on to some of the policy issues. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these because a lot of them have been very well covered, particularly of course in the last session that we had this morning. As Matt said, there are cards for each of the sectors, so the more detailed sector issues are being dealt with in those cards. And on the other issues, the more cross-cutting issues that are in the manifesto, there will be greater detail available to us and you if you want it, if you want to know more background depth to some of these questions. That's not something that we're going to make public because otherwise it'll just be plagiarized by the parties and they'll find their own answers to the questions, but they will be available. So just on policy, as I said, this very broad brush stuff. Well, I've found, always when talking to politicians, there's a lot of complacency about British farming. There's an assumption that British farmers are inherently very efficient and competitive, and left to their own devices, everything will be fine. Well, if you look at this graph, I think that gives the lie to it. So starting in 1961, where probably admittedly British farming was relatively very effective, very efficient, you can see that since then the red line at the bottom is unfortunately the UK, and the top line is Netherlands, and there are other countries there, including our direct competitors, if you like, Germany, that have improved far more than we have in the period. In fact, you know, our rate of increase of our productivity has been rather slow. I think that does absolutely give the lie to the fact that, you know, and it should be a wake-up call to politicians that more needs to be done to help the sector become more productive. I suppose the overarching theme of what we've got in the manifesto is that we need to grow the sector to meet consumer demands. This is something that was covered by the President very well in his speech yesterday. I think the important point that he made yesterday needs repeating. We're not going around to our members telling them that they have to expand. That's an individual business decision which needs to be made on business with a business case. What we are saying is that if the sector as a whole does not grow, then we will not be able to meet our rising population. Our self-sufficiency is going to fall, and that's not something we believe is in the national interest. I'd also say that going to politicians and saying actually we don't want to see the sector grow, we're not interested in growth, is a way of turning politicians off. They're only going to listen to us if they think they're dealing with a sector which is thriving, important, and wants to have a bigger part in our economy going forward. So what are some of the issues that are standing in the way of the sector as a whole growing? We've already mentioned tax as an issue. Matt covered that off already. It is a problem that we haven't got the same degree of tax incentives for becoming more productive that some of our neighbours and competitors have. We've got the planning issues, again mentioned briefly by the President in his speech yesterday, where and particularly since planning has become a more local issue, that local communities stand in the way of necessary investments that farmers need to make, and the issue of science, which again was brought up, I think, very well in the political session this morning. The fact that probably we are still dealing with the legacy of a decline in science 30 years ago, decline in science investment 30 years ago. That has been addressed more recently, but we're still suffering. There's a big time lag between investment in science and its application on farms, and we're still suffering from that time lag. And we do need to have better application of science, and we do need to have ability to have access to technology and science, which some of our competitors in the rest of the world have, and we don't. One of the big issues that's going to come up, and again this came up this morning, is the issue of Europe, whether we are going to have a referendum or whether we're going to be inside Europe or out. I want to say that only really of all the parties, and the parties we saw this morning, only UKIP has any kind of agricultural policy outside the European Union, and if that is attractive to you, you've got to ask the question: what's the likelihood of UKIP forming the next government? So I think it is important for us to interrogate the other parties, as John tried to do this morning, and with not much success, to try to get them to say, well, what would you do if there is a referendum, and whatever your personal views, it ends up with us being outside the European Union? What sort of policy would then be in place for British agriculture? The important issues here are, and I think there are four. One is our access to the European market, which at the moment is vital to us. 75%, 3/4 of our exports go there. It's often said, well, that wouldn't be an issue because the rest of the European Union would want to have an agreement with us to carry on free trade. I'm not convinced that's the case at all. We could, of course, have a kind of Norwegian arrangements, although that doesn't apply to agriculture, where we'd still get the advantages of the single market, still have to meet all the regulations without having a say in them. That doesn't appear to be a fantastically attractive offer. The second issue is about the CAP, which of course comes with the direct payments. UKIP has said that they would more or less continue with a kind of national direct payment system in England. The other parties have been completely silent about that, and I think the point which was made this morning by Hugh Ranker-Davies is a very pertinent one, that if we were to leave the European Union, there would be a big queue in the Treasury of ministers going to the Treasury for funds for different things, and where would agriculture be in that pecking order? What's the likelihood of any other government, any other party wanting to continue with the same level of direct payments that we've got at the moment, when all of the other parties, all of the other major parties, Conservative, Labour and Lib Dems, have said they want to get rid of direct payments as soon as they can, and the only thing at the moment that's stopping them is the fact that we're in the European Union. It's also the third issue here is about imports. Many times those who want us to leave the European Union do so on the grounds they want to have a freer trading relationship with the rest of the world. They want to break down barriers to importing from outside the European Union, and sugar is often mentioned as a fact. Well, if you're outside the European Union, we have freer trade arrangements on sugar, and sugar prices would come down. So it's those kind of things that you need to ask politicians: is that what you want? And so a combination of lower or maybe no direct payments and more open access to the rest of the world would be obviously a challenging one for the farming sector in this country. And finally, Labour, again, this was mentioned this morning, one of the advantages of being in the European Union is we have free movement to labour, and although the SAWS scheme is gone, which is something very much we regret, we do still have the opportunity to access labour, particularly from the newer member states. And since the European Union is still expanding, there are new members coming in. There will, in the future, likely be a pool of labour which will be possible to fill some of the jobs that it frankly is impossible to get domestic labour to be interested in doing. The CAP, again, very much mentioned yesterday by the President and picked up by both the Secretary of State and by the Commissioner. As Meurig said yesterday very forcibly, we think that the last reform was a big mistake. It does need to be revisited. We do need to look at greening, and we do need, as soon as we possibly can, to remove some of the nonsenses around that. That's not going to be easy or quick to do, but it is essential that we get politicians to commit to doing that. We do need a better decision-making process within the European Union. It's one of the problems that we now face is that sometimes decisions are captured by single interest groups, and I think that's an important thing to be addressed. And generally speaking, better regulation in the European Union, which is more based on science, not on emotion, are all things that I think we need to push with our own politicians. And finally, the final issue I mentioned, of course there are many, many more I haven't mentioned, but just to pick up some of the really important issues. Bovine TB, again, came up very well this morning. The NFU's position is absolutely that we support the comprehensive strategy which was outlined, which was issued last April. That has it's a comprehensive strategy. It addresses all sources of the disease. It's addressed at keeping TB out of the low-risk areas, dealing with the disease in the high-risk areas and preventing the spread in the edge areas in between, using all the possible tools that we've got in the box. And that's why it is supported by the NFU and by farmers generally, because it does cover all those issues. And it's important that we absolutely stress that. And important that we don't present ourselves as just being interested in in dealing with it in the wildlife. That is obviously essential, but it's not the only part of the strategy, and we don't want to be painted as simply being interested in killing wildlife. It's no, what our interest is dealing with the disease, eradicating the disease. So it's important to try to get all the politicians we can to commit to supporting that strategy, not, as Meurig said yesterday, tearing it up or just being interested in only implementing the politically easy parts of it. I think it's really essential to interrogate all the parties on pilots and rollout. It's still not really clear where all the parties are on that, other than now the Labour Party, which has come out very clearly. They're going to stop the pilots and there'll be no rollout. That's clear. It's absolutely, as we know, unacceptable to us, but that is their policy and they need to be challenged on it. The Conservatives have said they will continue the pilots. They're less clear about the rollouts, and I think that would be interesting or important to try to pin them down on exactly what they have in mind. Clearly they can't do anything until after the election, but I think some clearer indication of where they would want to go is important. The Lib Dems position, I think, is pretty unclear. I think, as I understand it, that they are probably agreeing that they would continue the pilots, but I think they're very uncommitted to a further rollout, certainly not in the near future, and that's another area where they need to be challenged. As was said again this morning, an independent eradication board is going to make the delivery of this important strategy easier. At the moment it is a bit fragmented. Having an independent eradication board overseeing the strategy and reporting directly to ministers, I think it was would be a very important step, and something, again, it would be useful to press politicians on. So that's a really quick run through on what I see as being the key points in this, and I'll hand back now to Matt to continue with how to lobby and what to do.
Thank you, Martin. Martin's hit on the key emotional area at the moment with the TB lobbying, and one plea I'd make to livestock producers and dairy producers in the audience is, please can you thank your MPs that have stood up for the pilot culls so far. They are getting hundreds of emails and letters from aunties, and they don't hear that much from the people who are hit. And it might be that you've contacted them in the past a couple of years ago and said, can you do something, but it's important to try and redress that balance. The other thing is, if anybody's involved in social media, perhaps the younger farmers involved in Twitter and things like that, it's very useful to try and damp down the debate when people are ranting on about TB. You don't have to get fully involved, but you can just say something like, there are two sides to this argument. For example, see TB Free England, and just put a link to the website. That's all you need to say, but you're putting a different side to the argument, which may influence some of the people involved. Right, so what have we done traditionally? Well, traditionally we've been doing candidate engagement with MPs and prospective candidates. We've encouraged group secretaries and county advisors and regional directors to contact the candidates, maybe include a copy of the manifesto. And what we'd encourage you to do is use the feedback form, which is in the corner there, which is just a checklist of what to do when you're at a meeting. It says things like, did you get their phone number? Did you take a photograph? Did you do a press release? So it's just a little aid-memoir, really, and hopefully it means you can fill that out at the meeting. You don't have to do any further follow-up once you've done that. The other thing that we'd encourage you to do when you're meeting with MPs is just say to them, will you ask a question on this topic? You don't have to give them the question at the time. Come to your regional director, your county advisor or us, we will give you the question, but if they've agreed to ask a question in Parliament, happy days, we're very happy about that. And the other thing to do is to try and engage with them on farm visits. Farm visits are much more visual than going into Westminster. If we meet an MP in Westminster, we'll see them for about 20 minutes. If you see an MP on farm, you'll see them for about 2 hours. So you can work out the benefit of that. The great thing of that as well is you can have a sort of a structured meeting, maybe in the farm office or in the kitchen, and then you can take them out on a walk. And if you take them out on a walk, you can show them examples of your various issues, your planning issues, your environmental issues, and so forth, and get a photo which we can then use. What we're encouraging people to do as well is to get photographs with the manifesto as they meet the candidates. So as you can see on the photograph here, we've got the Minister Dan Rogerson, who we saw this morning at the Lib Dem conference. We've got the Chancellor up on a dairy farm in the northwest. We've got Secretary of State on farm in Oxfordshire, and we've got Yvette Cooper with a prospective candidate up in the northwest last week. So what you can do further for this time, 2015, is we've got the invitation campaign, which has been highlighted all the way through. But if you haven't yet signed up for an invitation, please do so on your way out this afternoon. It's at the registration area. Really, really important thing to do, a really proactive thing to do. You can also, and that way you're inviting an MP onto farm. You can also attend the local hustings, and if you speak to your regional directors or county advisors, you can find out where those are taking place. The top 10 manifesto asks we've already talked about on the back of your delegate badges, and then again breaking it down by commodity, the top 5 for your particular commodity, and again reiterate those are at the membership area on your way out. And above all, get behind the Great British Food Gets My Vote campaign. It's a really good way of utilising social media, get it around your family and friends, and highlight the importance of food in this election. So I've got a timeline here. Apologies, it's a little bit small for those of you at the back, but basically it's just got some of the indicative dates through to the general election. The most interesting part really is the PERDA period, which George Eustace talked about this morning. That basically means that Westminster will shut down for the period of the election from mid-March. We don't know exactly the day the button is going to be pressed for the election campaign, because that's down to the coalition to decide, but the bets are on for the 30th of March. So we haven't got very long. We're into March tomorrow, are we? Or the day after tomorrow? We're into March soon anyway, so we haven't got very long before that takes place, and then we're going to have the last budget, etc., etc., etc. The most interesting bits really are the things like the main manifestos are not going to come out till mid-April. That's why perhaps the Secretary of State yesterday and Lib Dems Labour weren't saying that much in the discussion earlier. The UKIP manifesto is out for agriculture and the Green manifesto is out for agriculture, but the main 3 big parties aren't out yet. And we go through to the general election. Now, speculation is rife as to what the outcome will be, and we're probably going to have a period of uncertainty after the election. And this really has got a caveat on it of this is speculation, but this was something that was in the Financial Times a couple of weeks ago, and I think it demonstrates quite well the variations in government that we could end up with, because the startling prediction as of the Financial Times 2 weeks ago, and things can change, there's a long election campaign ahead of us, is the chances of there being a Labour majority of 2%, the chances of there being a Conservative majority of 2%, the chances of there being some other form of government are 96%. Now, that can change, but I think it's really important to look at that slide and look at those parties that are involved, because we need to engage with all the parties, not just the traditional ones that perhaps we've dealt with locally, because these people really could make a difference. I'm only saying this to kind of potentially cause a bit of stir, but for example, if the Greens were in coalition with another party, where do you think the Greens would like their minister to be? Well, my bets are on they'd want them in DEC, Energy and Climate Change, or DEFRA, Environment, Food and Rural Affairs. So we need to engage with all these people, because we never know where they might turn up. But what's interesting about this prediction in the Financial Times is that a Labour coalition is more likely than a Conservative coalition, just down to the parties that they can go into power with. And the big question mark here is the SNP. Nobody really knows what's going to happen with the SNP. But even parties like Plaid Cymru are more left-leaning, so would be more likely to go in with a Labour coalition, whereas the parties that are more likely to go in with the Conservatives are more limited, like the Democratic Unionists in Northern Ireland. So I think hopefully that will give you food for thought and encourage you to deal with all the parties. So after the election, really important, congratulate your new candidate, because you're going to have to work with them for the next 5 years, and if they've been a good MP, and they've lost their seat, please send them a commiseratory letter and say thanks for the help you've done, because you never know where they're going to turn up. They'll probably end up in the House of Lords or something like that. So it's really important to work with those people. Try and meet with your new MP at least once a year, and preferably on farm, and try and mentor or buddy your MP. I went to visit our old livestock chairman from BBO, a lovely lady, Marilyn Ivings, a year or so back, and she had a photograph on her mantelpiece of David Cameron walking into number 10. And I said, "Oh, Marilyn, where did you get that photograph from? It's quite striking." She said, "Have a look on the back." And on the back was a handwritten note saying, "Dear Marilyn, bet you never thought I'd get this far." And that's because Marilyn had engaged with the BBO NFU with David Cameron when he was a prospective candidate in the year 2000, before he was even an MP. And now they've got that mentor-buddy relationship. It's important also to work with whoever gets into power in May or June even, depending on how quickly they sort it out. So it's important to work with every party that we might be involved with. And it's also important to remember publicity opportunities using your regional press officer. I think I've got pictures of all the main parties. Yeah, there's representatives of all the parties that we might need to deal with there. And finally, just remember that the NFU Westminster office is here to help you. We'll be delighted to help with any protocols around the elections, boundaries, prospective candidates. We've now got a database of 3,500 candidates for this election. It was sent out to county advisors and regional directors on Monday. So if you want to get hold of the details of your local people standing in your local seat, they'll be able to help you out with that. We'll also help out with sample questions for any hustings that you have and any other general information you might want to have. There's a general election pack which suggests how you can set up a hustings and the rules and regulations around that. And if you want to follow us on Twitter, we're at NFU Political, and you can see how we're going. And on general election night, we will be doing through the night results on NFU Political and the NFU website, NFU Westminster website. So we'll be talking about rural seats as they declare and how it will affect the rural sector and agriculture. But really, overall, I'd just like to say it's an exciting opportunity. It's a 1 in 5 year chance. It's a much bigger election than it's been for a very long time. So please get involved, get stuck in, and enjoy it. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Thanks, Martin. Okay, we have just a few minutes for any pressing questions, if there are. Now's your chance. Anybody? Right up in the gods. Always handy to have one up there, furthest away from the microphone. Which is swiftly coming to you.
Peter Gadd.
Okay. Out of the floodlights emerges Peter Gadd.
Thank you, Guy. Peter Gadd. Matt, there's going to be a bit of a vacuum, one thinks, after the election day, before the new government is formed. Is there anything that we can do as a union to push home our lobby message in that spell and be ready for it?
Absolutely, because whoever the new government is, if it is a coalition, will have to form a coalition document. So there will be a window of opportunity in which we can really try to push things. What we found last time round, and this time round again I will find, is they're going to have general headline policies rather than lower level policies. But we can definitely push on it. We're quite hopeful that we'll have a new coalition or new government in place by May the 18th, because we've got a reception for all new MPs on that day, which is booked. It's the only day available. But yeah, there is a window of opportunity there, and so we'll be asking for the troops to help once we know the outcome.
Any others? Good. Mr. Betton, I believe.
You were asking where he was. Is this microphone working?
It is, Richard, far away.
Good. Now, I appreciate that you drew this manifesto up last summer, but since then we've had the announcement of last year's farm income figures, and I would like to draw particular attention to less favoured area grazing livestock, which saw an 18% drop in income to 14,700. And with the uncertainties in the Eurozone, which could affect and destroy our sheep meat export to the EU, very important to the hills, and also reduce the basic payment scheme payment, and the disappearance of UELS schemes over the next couple of years, a lot of farmers in the uplands are facing what could be described quite accurately as a perfect storm. I think we need to highlight this in the election manifesto. I think we need to actually ask the question if people want to see the hills farmed in the future. So all that adds to our productivity, and I want to see us as an industry actually increasing what we produce rather than being tied down by ideologies and green parties and other people who think the hills are for recreation and water storage and not part of our food chain. It's a very disadvantaged and little understood part of the farming community, and I think it deserves a little bit of help through the manifesto. Thank you.
Well, the first manifesto was produced back in August last year, but the second version came out only a month ago, so it has been updated slightly. As far as LFAs go, very important area, and you know, it is taken very seriously. The themes of the manifesto are kind of overriding, so they're talking about profit and sustainability, etc., of all businesses, whether it's at LFAs or wherever it may be. As far as LFAs in particular go, it's important to lobby those MPs in those areas where LFAs are, to make them kind of champions and specialists in that. So we're thinking of people like Tim Farron for the Lib Dems up in Cumbria and MPs in the southwest, etc. But it's important to work locally with those things because that might be more of a local issue than a national issue.
I have to say, Richard, whenever I speak to the chairman of the EFRA Select Committee, it's quite clear that you've been lobbying it very hard. I'm sure you'll continue to do that.
But, you know, Richard, I think you raised the issue of its importance for local, to do it locally, to recognise your own issues, to take it to your local MPs, and obviously we at top level will help you do so. But, you know, agriculture is important across this election. I think it might have been mentioned last night that I come from Clacton, which has a UKIP MP, and Clacton is not known as an agricultural heartland, but the fact we have Douglas Carswell there makes me realise that this is a bit different this time round, and it's important to lobby wherever we can. Any other questions? Okay, on that note, I'll just wrap up by saying, you know, this is not a time in the next 3 months to underestimate ourselves. As we've heard repeatedly from the President, from the Deputy President over the last 2 days, that agriculture is the most important industry in rural areas in terms of as a manufacturing industry, and it underpins the most important manufacturing industry nationally in food and drink. And so it is quite legitimate for us to go in front of MPs and prospective MPs to ask them to come up with sensible, thought-through, detailed policies for agriculture. On that note, I'll bring this session to an end, and President, the stage is set for your concluding remarks.
Thank you, Guy, for that introduction, and again, thank you, Matt and Martin and Guy, for that session. I won't keep you long. I see a lot of people have disappeared home, but a few words to sum up. I think we must all agree that we have had a fantastic conference over the last 2 days. From my point of view, I've been absolutely delighted looking out at the audience and seeing so many young people attend our conference this year. And to me, that bodes well for the future. It highlights the energy, the enthusiasm, and the determination of the younger people to get involved in this great industry of ours. When I think back over the years, when I first got involved within the National Farmers Union, we used to employ an outside agency to actually set up the conference and plan that conference, and it did cost the organisation an awful lot of money. But I'm delighted to say that we have a fantastic team working in partnership with the regions, right down to group secretary level, in actually planning this conference this year again. So it's a massive thank you to everyone involved, but I do need to mention 4 or 5 people. A special thanks to Chris Taylor, who has led the team, to Jeanette Clark, who has been involved in organising this conference for number of years I should say, to Lee Woodger and his team, to Gemma Fitzpatrick and her team, but a big thank you to Julia Ironside, who has been organising us behind stage, making certain we're on time, making certain that everything's been run into time. So to those people and their teams, a huge thank you from us, the membership and office holders. And without you, we could not have had as a successful conference. So well done. In my opening remarks, and we've just heard it at this session, I sort of explained how important this election was. We're leading up to an election where there is no predictable party that's seen to be leading us in government after May the 7th. So that outcome is so unpredictable. We have heard over this morning from the politicians what some of their views are. I think most of them understood the importance of farming. Obviously there's going to be a huge issue around bovine TB, and I was taken back by Hughie Ranker-Davies when he was not prepared to review any evidence that comes forward from the hard work that's been done in Gloucester and Somerset. So we're going to have to challenge this party, urge that party to rethink their position. You've heard in this session what we have put into the manifesto, the 47 asks of the prospective MPs going forward into the general election. We have highlighted in that manifesto what the industry needs to build a successful, a profitable sector, which sums up the theme, back in British farming in volatile times. We've heard the importance of increasing production, the importance of British food, which has been highlighted through the YouGov poll, which we, the NFU, commissioned. And again, that reinforces the message to all of us that the nation needs us as farmers. As we have heard, it is the biggest sector within the UK. The public wishes us to produce more, and they are prepared to support us. And lastly, as farmers, we can deliver on some of those expectations of society. Now it is up to you, the membership, to carry these messages back to your regions, to your counties, and to challenge prospective MPs how they intend to back British farming after the general election. I do not intend this afternoon to summarise all the issues and all the challenges that we have debated and discussed over the last 2 days. We've done that in this hall, and there have been some excellent breakout sessions. The commodity breakout sessions and the other breakout sessions, I've attended some of those, and the debate and the discussion I found quite stimulating. But it is up to you, good people, now to go back and drive those messages back into your counties, I say. For my part, and from the office holder team, I promise you we will take these challenges to the heart of government, to the European Commission and to the European Parliament, and to all the players in that supply chain. We, as primary producers, I would suggest, is the most important part of that supply chain, from primary producer through to consumer. And we will emphasise on your behalf the need for an efficient, competitive, fair, profitable farming industry. I picked up a statement from John Humphreys this morning when he said, "The National Farmers Union is great at what it achieves, and for us to carry on doing the good work that we have delivered over the last number of years." I thought that was a good sanction for us as an organisation. So can I finally thank all of you for attending this conference. Can I wish you all a safe journey home? Can I wish all of you a better farming year this year than last year? Let's hope the weather's kind. We will, as an NFU, be holding our annual general meeting at 3 o'clock in this hall. Please do stay for that annual general meeting. But finally, a very big thank you to all of you as delegates for attending, and as I say, a safe journey home. Thank you very much.